The King's Avatar. Chapter 1638. The Championship is Ours. Audio source wushaworldaudiobook.com. Chapter 1638. The Championship is Ours. Translator, Nomyami. Editor, Nomyami. Culture Square, one of City S's famous shopping areas. The giant open-air screen hanging on the outside of the North Building was far more spectacular than any screen hanging inside a Glory Stadium. And right now, this screen that had become a symbol of the city was currently playing the highlights from last night's match between Samsara and Happy. 10 years ago, this would have been unimaginable. At that time, even though esports had already developed to a certain extent, it still didn't attract much attention, and it was still far from mainstream. But today, clips from the finals would be played in a public city square. It seemed like Samsara had become the pride of City S. Because of Samsara, so many people in this city were now concerned about the Glory finals. Of the people passing through this square, perhaps some would stop in their tracks and watch for a while, perhaps some would just spare a glance before continuing to walk. Some were paying close attention to these matches, some didn't know much, but if someone were to say that they didn't even know what this was, then they would certainly earn some disdainful looks. Glory was no longer just the glory of the players, the teams, or the fans. It was now the glory of an entire city. And the weight of the hopes carried by the players and teams was greater than ever before. What a shame! If we won yesterday, we would have had 3 straight championships. Tangro heard the man standing ahead of her speaking regretfully. Yeah, too bad. The person standing next to him was sighing as well. Tangro had been standing here for a while. She knew that these two hadn't known each other beforehand, but because they had both paused to watch and happened to be standing next to each other, they began a discussion. Tangro could tell that these two weren't Glory players. Their dialogue was full of that half-understanding, hearsay, exaggerated public opinions. But from start to finish, the word they used was "we". These two people weren't Glory players at all. But they were still paying attention to this match, they still felt a strong connection to their city's team, they still held high hopes for the championship. This was the best evidence of Glory's ever-expanding presence and influence. Tangro smiled. Even though these people supported the opposing side, she deeply appreciated this attitude. She herself had started as an indifferent passerby, gradually investing more in all of this. Even in the beginning, she hadn't even felt that Glory was all that interesting. All she wanted to do was become a bit stronger, and then defeat that guy who'd forced her to lose over a dozen games in a row. But now, it had been a while since she'd cared about that. Now, she aimed for a larger goal than defeating Yishu. Like all of the other pro players, she yearned for victory. She hoped to win the championship. Was this because she always strove to outdo others? Maybe a little. But if she only cared about that, then perhaps her vision would have remained fixed on Yishu. But now, when she looked at Yishu, she thought about how to better cooperate with him, and then achieve victory together. This was no longer simply a desire to outdo others. There was another feeling quietly growing in her heart. She no longer fought just for her individual interest. She now had things she was carrying upon her back. Her teammates, the fans, and those like the two people in front of her now, who didn't understand the game, but still drew pride from it. It was a bit unfortunate that she hadn't gone on stage yesterday. But the team had won, and that was more important than anything. Right now, this was Tangro's truest feeling. The championship is ours. Tangro suddenly shouted. Without waiting for everyone's eyes to land upon her, she spun around and left. Everyone paused. The match displayed on this massive screen was quite exciting, but for them, for this city, it felt a bit oppressive. because in yesterday's match, victory did not belong to them. Victory had gone to Team Happy. Right now, everyone was gathered here and watching this match, but their minds had already gone to the next match. They were looking forward to victory in the next round, and then they would have the championship. The championship is ours. This sentence truly expressed the sentiment in everyone's hearts. Even though it came out so suddenly, catching everyone off guard, soon they were set aflame by the passion in this simple statement. Yes, the championship is ours. Someone echoed the shout, and then, more and more, more and more. In this square, whether or not they understood glory, as long as they knew this competition, they hoped for the championship, and they joined in this shouting. Only those senior players who were very familiar with the glory competition found the short-haired silhouette leaving the crowd. They were stunned. That girl. Wasn't that Happy's Tang Ro? Someone said. You're saying, this year's rookie king, Tang Ro. The Tang Ro who promised to retire after failing a 1v3, but backed out. That really pretty Tang Ro. More and more sets of eyes looked in that direction. Tang Ro walked farther and farther away, but everyone believed more and more, this was indeed Tang Ro. So, what she shouted just now. Someone suddenly realized. So that, ours, was referring to Happy. Quote. They were instantly dumbfounded. And right now, the good citizens of City S in the square were currently shouting. The championship is ours, in a surge of public feeling. Thinking about how this, ours, was actually referring to Happy made them all sorts of uncomfortable. But how could they explain it now? And even if they could, so what? Were they not allowed to use the word ours? Tang Ro shouted ours. We'll shout ours, and the ours that we're shouting refers to Samsara. Everyone understood this clearly. After getting this point clear, these loyal Samsara fans had nothing more to worry about. They would simply accept this mistake and make the best of it, shouting along with everyone, the championship is ours. The shouts grew louder and louder, but Tang Ro didn't look back. She strolled along the road, all the way back to the hotel. Heading upstairs, she saw Yishu hanging around in the hallway, smoking. When he saw her, he waved. WashOurWorldAudio.com. Where'd you go? He asked casually. I just took a walk, said Tang Ro. Oh. Good luck tomorrow. Quote. No moving, sensational encouragement. Yishu simply said this offhand sentence to Tang Ro. Tomorrow. Yet Tang Ro still found a fault in his words. More good luck for the day after, said Yishu calmly. Ha! Tang Ro laughed without saying anything. But then, she noticed that the room Yishu was headed toward didn't seem to be his own room. Where are you going? She asked, curious. Some kids wanted some data, I'm bringing it to them, said Yishu. In Happy, aside from Wei Chen, Yishu would casually call everyone kids. Tang Ro didn't know who he was referring to, but she saw him walk into Luo Ji's room. Now that her curiosity had been piqued, Tang Ro followed. In Luo Ji's room, he, Qiao Yivan, and Wenyi were all circled around one computer. Here, Yishu held out a USB. Luo Ji accepted it and inserted it into the computer. He soon found what he was looking for and pulled it up on screen alongside his own document. He also had his notebook open, covered in writing, and he began theory crafting with Wenyi and Qiao Yivan. Yishu stood to the side, arms folded, smoking, listening very attentively. Tang Ro hid a smile. She suspected that, regarding what Luo Ji was explaining right now, even she understood more than Yishu. This kid was once again using his numbers to analyze some probabilities. But he was speaking too in-depth. A formula here, a derivation there, and Wenyi and Qiao Yivan looked as confused as steamed bun. Finally, Yishu could take it no longer. He finally moved, and pointed to a spot on Luoji's screen. "Take a look here." Tang Rou was shocked. The part of the document that he pointed out was the calculation of the characteristic function through a Fourier transform of the probability density function. Yishu was able to understand something that complex. Even she only knew what the words were but nothing of the details. After pointing it out, Yishu was already turning around to leave, and he was met with Tang Rou's shocked expression. "Another lesson for you," Yishu said, walking by Tang Rou. "Not just your opponents. You can't underestimate your teammates either." He had already walked past, and Tang Rou could only continue to stare wide-eyed at his retreating back. But then, from behind her, she heard Luoji ask, "What's wrong here?" "There's a bit of dirt there," said Yishu, walking out of the room. Oh, Luoji hurriedly pulled out his glasses cloth and rubbed at that spot on his screen. End chapter. The King's Avatar. Chapter 1639. The Final Battle. Audio source, wuxia-world-audiobook.com. Chapter 1639. The Final Battle. Translator, Nomyami. Editor, Nomyami. The first rest day after the match passed just like that. Aside from the review in the afternoon, Happy's players didn't gather together. Instead, each did their own thing. Yishu and Sumo Chung just ate and chatted, treating it like any other day. Tang Rou took a walk by herself, to keep her mind off things. Fang Rui and Mo Fang closed themselves in their rooms and didn't show their faces again. And Qiao Yivan, and Wenyi, and Luoji, these three youths seemed to make the most of their time. Even now, they were still diligently investigating something. The ones who ended up giving Chen Guo the most worry were Wei Chen and Steamed Bun. After the afternoon review, they left, and she didn't see them at all after that. She'd said that everyone was free to do their own thing, so of course she felt it would be rude to ask. But as it grew later and later, these two still hadn't returned, and Chen Guo gripped the phone in her hand, debating whether or not she should call and ask. At the same time, she listened hard for any sound of their return in the hallway. She would wait 10 more minutes. If they still weren't back in 10 minutes, she would ask where they were. Chen Guo carried this determination, but 10 minutes became 20, and then an hour. By this time, it was already 11:00 at night. Finally, Chen Guo couldn't hold back any longer. She picked up her phone, and dialed Wei Chen's number. An unfamiliar ringtone sounded right from the hallway. The back. Chen Guo didn't hang up, instead directly rushing out of the room to look. As expected, in the hallway, Chen Guo saw Wei Chen and Steamed Bun beaming as they walked along. Because his phone was ringing, Wei Chen was currently feeling around in his pocket. When they saw Chen Guo rush out, the two of them casually greeted her, and then Wei Chen pulled out his phone, and saw who was calling him. "Looking for me?" Wei Chen asked Chen Guo. "Oh, I saw that you two still weren't back, so I wanted to ask," Chen Guo said, as naturally as she could. She didn't want him to think of her as a worrisome old woman, even though she did feel much calmer seeing their return. "Oh, we were just at that internet cafe at the corner," Wei Chen said. "Why did you two go to an internet cafe?" Chen Guo was confused. "Running a black inn," said Wei Chen. "It's really fun, boss, you should come with us next time." Steamed Bun enthusiastically invited her. Chen Guo was speechless. Running a black inn was a gaming term for something commonly seen in internet cafes. To put it simply, a few players would sit together, so that they could see each other's screens and easily communicate offline. With this advantage, they would be able to reach extremely good coordination, and they would bully their opponents, strangers that had been randomly grouped together. This kind of behavior wasn't worthy of being condoned, of course. As a devoted Glory fan, Chen Guo always gave dirty looks to the raucous guests running black-ins in her internet cafe. She couldn't drive them out just for doing that, but whenever the internet cafe held events, like discount cards, she definitely wouldn't give these people preferential treatment. But now, Team Happy, a professional team that had made it to the finals, 2 of their pro players had actually gone to an internet cafe to run a black-in. Right now, Chen Guo had only one thing to say to them. Do you really have to be like this? If only you could do this during a match, that would be great. Steamed Bun actually said this with deep feeling. Chen Guo glared furiously at Wei Chen. This was definitely all his idea. It's getting late, go to sleep. If we ever have some free time later we can go again. Wei Chen, completely ignoring her, said goodbye to Steamed Bun. Okay. Steamed Bun cheerfully returned to his own room. But Wei Chen looked at Chen Guo, chuckled and said, You think we're very low for doing this, don't you? Very much so. Chen Guo nodded. Actually, this is a type of religious practice. Wei Chen said. What do you mean? Chen Guo asked. Next time, you can come along. Wei Chen said. Oh, okay. Chen Guo automatically agreed. Wei Chen smiled, said good night, and also returned to his room. Chen Guo stood there dumbly for another half a minute, and felt like crying. Morals. Where had her morals gone? What religious practice? This guy was making it up, right? He was just completely and utterly shameless. Just like that, the first rest day passed by. The second day was also free time for everyone. Because there was no strategy meeting like the review, Chen Guo didn't even see everyone. Chen Guo really was very curious as to what everyone was doing, and she really wanted to send a "What's everyone doing?" message to the group chat. But, restraint. Chen Guo didn't want to bother everyone. In her heart, she truly trusted everyone. Even though these happy players all had different personalities, and some were all sorts of strange, Chen Guo felt that this was a very reliable team. Taking Wei Chen and Steamed Bun running a black-in, for example, Chen Guo believed that it was a sort of religious practice for them, a way for them to relax. As for staying out so late at night, she'd said she was worried, but it might have been more curiosity. So Chen Guo restrained herself. She didn't want her curiosity to ruin everyone's personal rhythms. If there was anything she wanted to know or ask, she could wait until the day the match ended. The second day swung past. On the night of the third day would be the final championship match of this season. And on this day, the team would have a team practice, for the sake of warm-up. And so, in the drawing room, Chen Guo saw everyone gathered together for the first time since that review meeting. Nervous. As the final match approached, Chen Guo couldn't help but grow more and more nervous. WuxRWorldAudio.com. She was scared. She was scared that after everyone had worked so hard for a year, they would miss this final step. That disappointment, that frustration, Chen Guo truly had no idea how to face it. The team practice lasted for around 2 hours, but they didn't interact much. The atmosphere was a bit oppressive, but under this atmosphere, Happy's players were fully focused. No one said anything to try and relieve this atmosphere. They reached a sort of harmony with the pressure. Yishu seemed to be very satisfied with this way of handling the situation. After the 2-hour team practice ended, he was smiling as he began speaking. Is everyone ready? Yishu asked. Some nodded, some spoke, it was all in agreement. Then, let's win this, Yishu said. Once again, they nodded. And then, head out. Toward Samsara's home stadium, toward the final match of this season, Happy stepped onto their final journey. The stadium was packed starting very early. Even the pro players had entered the stadium very early, and were now waiting patiently for the match's start. For the final match, the victory poll had been opened once again, and this time, what caught people's attention was no longer just the comparison in percentage. This time, the number of people casting votes was incredibly few, far fewer than those of any previous playoffs matches. This was the final, championship deciding match. How could people not pay attention? But to pay attention, and abstain from casting a vote, there was naturally only one explanation: many people didn't know to whom their vote should go. Aside from those who were firmly biased toward one side, those who were neutral or those relying on logic to analyze the question had no way to predict this match's outcome. In the first game, Samsara defeated Happy at Happy's home stadium. Such a strong performance had instantly destroyed the powerhouse Happy image that had been built up after Happy vs. Tyranny. Thus, in the second game's vote, Samsara completely suppressed Happy. But then, in the second game, Yizhu led Happy by defeating Josekai in 1v1, and then in the team competition, all sorts of godly performances shook the stage. People found that they had been very wrong in their assessments that Samsara would win for sure. Happy won in Samsara's demonic home stadium, breaking Samsara's perfect home record. Samsara defeated Happy at Happy's home, and they retaliated by defeating Samsara in their home. On paper, Samsara's strength was greater than Happy's, anyone would admit this. But if Happy once again had this kind of godlike performance, Happy's unpredictability caused everyone who wanted to rely on logic to become lost. Right now, everyone wanted to use the phrase that commentator Lee Yibo often fell back upon when he couldn't clearly determine the situation: let's wait and see. Wait and see. Glory Pro League Season 10, the championship deciding final match. Amidst blinding lights and deafening cheers, it began. The two teams' players lined up on stage. The curtain was about to close on this season's journey. Who would be the champion? Samsara. With the home stadium advantage, Samsara's fans took the lead in making noise. End chapter. The King's Avatar. Chapter 1640. Inevitable Confrontation. Audio source: WuxRWorldAudiobook.com. Chapter 1640. Inevitable Confrontation. Translator: Nomyami. Editor: Nomyami. No matter how much support they received on the internet, no matter how many neutral Glory fans were beginning to favor Happy, but in this stadium, the support for Samsara would always be unrivaled. This was their home stadium. Here were their most die-hard fans. No matter what, they would never give up on supporting their team. Samsara is the champion. The stadium was filled with such shouts. Perhaps influenced by what had happened yesterday at Culture Square, the Samsara fans in the stadium today very carefully used Samsara as the subject of their cheers. Even though Happy's fans were unwilling to show weakness, it was indeed difficult to take the upper hand when the other side had this kind of momentum. After going through the trials of this season, Happy's fan group now had experience of challenging the opponent's home stadium. As the away team, because of the vast numbers disparity, there was no way to knock over the opponent through sheer sound. In this situation, they had to rely more on chants and banners, creating visual momentum. These, at least, could not be covered no matter what. But there was a big pitfall to this strategy, which was holding up a large sign would block the view of the row or rows sitting right behind. This pitfall largely limited the usage of posters and banners. But today, Happy's fans went AEAD with it regardless. In the away team audience section, row after row of signs declared victory, so dense that the section looked like a mountain forest. The section seemed to be entirely banners, no people. Aside from the audience members sitting in the very front, there was practically no row whose line of sight could escape. Even though the match still hadn't officially begun, for the happy fans to prepare their banners to create such a magnificent sight, it could be seen how conscious the fans were of this match. Their sound couldn't resound in this stadium, but this continuous expanse of banners became the focus of attention in this stadium, and the television broadcast gave them extra screen time. If they hadn't prepared beforehand, this kind of thing could never happen spontaneously, no matter how many fans Samsara had. They had no other choice, they could only bring forth even more volume, to fight against Happy's visual momentum. Beneath the clashing swords, the two teams completed the pre-match exchange very calmly. After simple handshakes, however, the new height of pre-match excitement arrived. Because this match would determine to whom the championship belonged, the Alliance arranged for the championship trophy, the symbol of supreme glory, to be revealed before the match. The stadium's lights extinguished all at once, and before the audience even had time to utter shouts, the spotlights all converged on the podium. At some point, the trophy had already been placed there, but under the absolute concentration of light. In this instant, it seemed like the sun hanging in the sky, flashing with infinite radiance. The players, the audience, everyone's gazes were captured by this sight. The spotlights dispersed, the stadium's normal lighting came back on, and instantly everything was back to normal. But everyone's gazes continued to linger on that championship trophy, gazes filled with desire and anticipation. "Fuck, what a cheap gimmick," someone among the pro players complained, sounding extremely scornful, but no one answered. In that instant where the championship trophy had been lit up, whether or not they had won the championship before, every single one of them had felt their hearts stir. This was a gimmick, but it was an extremely effective gimmick. Even for the one who had complained, there'd been some longing in his tone, a refusal to resign. This match, this sort of gimmick, it really provoked a certain sadness in their hearts. The match was about to begin, but the two teams didn't immediately return to their player areas. They gathered in front of their respective competitor booths, and everyone looked up toward the giant display screen, waiting for the group arena's random map selection. With a sound, the selection began. Images flashed by on screen for around 5 seconds, before suddenly coming to a halt. A digital voice clearly announced the name of this map, Inevitable Confrontation. The name of this map really fits the occasion. No information was released beforehand about the random maps used in the playoffs. Even the broadcast commentators were only learning about the map now, and the commentary of course began from the name. Championship, finals, an encounter on a narrow road, inevitable confrontation. There was no more description more fitting. And now, the map that had been chosen had this name. The holographic projection in the stadium display screen began a simple overview of this map's layout and characteristics. A narrow valley, a bit twisting, but not complex. On both sides were steep and towering cliffs. As for whether they could be climbed, aside from a nightwalker carrying a ninja too, it was hard to say. At this time, people would automatically think of Lord Grimm's many changing techniques. But because these cliffs were so high, as soon as they reached the top, they would be too far away to pose any threat at all to those at the bottom. As for whether or not there were any ambush points along the wall, that could not be seen clearly from such a brief introduction. "It doesn't look like there's anything particularly special about this map," Panlin said, after seeing this simple overview. There were definitely many maps in the original selection that had this kind of simple feature, and this map had been specially made for the playoffs. WashOurWorldAudio.com. If they'd only designed this valley with a few extra twists and turns, there was really nothing new about this at all. Just as everyone was wondering the same question, suddenly, there were screams of murder from the holographic projection. Everyone watched as horses and men appeared at both ends of the canyon, and ambushes also appeared on both mountain walls. Soon, the men and horses met at the center of the canyon and began to fight, killing each other ferociously. On the cliffs, the ambush is activated, and all sorts of boulders and wood tumbled down. In a few moments, both armies were completely wiped out. Everyone was stunned. What was this? It surely wasn't an animation just added to complement the name Inevitable Confrontation, right? This was the finals. They need to introduce the map information in an orderly way. How could such empty showiness be allowed? So, this wasn't some animation created to enhance the atmosphere. This was something that would actually happen on this map. It wasn't just about the topography, they were actually introducing interfering events. Regardless of the outcome of this match, this design would inevitably trigger much discussion and controversy afterward. But at the moment, the audience was very curious to see how the players would respond to such a map with events and NPC interference. Yet right now, there was pitifully little information about this interference. Was the timing of this event completely random, or set for a certain time? Would it only happen once per battle, or multiple? From their attacks, it seemed like the two groups on opposite ends of the canyon and those on the cliff walls formed three separate teams. What would be their attitudes toward the players' characters? Too much information that was needed to understand this map was not given before the match. And because of the ingenuity of this design, acquiring information about this map would be much more complicated than simply observing the terrain characteristics. The first and even the second players of both teams would have to do a lot of work in this aspect. So, who would the two teams send up? Everyone was very curious. But on television, commentators Pan Lin and Li Yibo were very evasive. Although they had some ideas in their minds, they didn't dare speak easily. They had truly been face-slapped too many times. This time, continuing to send out Yizhu first is a very appropriate choice for Happy. Over in the pro players section, they didn't have anything holding them back, and after discussion, they all agreed on this prediction. Facing such a complex situation, it would be best to send out Yizhu, someone who was experienced and had extremely good awareness. While garnering information, he had a very high chance of winning battles in such unpredictable situations. As for Samsara, quote, from Happy, Yizhu was the best choice. Everyone recognized this in a glance. Not only did it make sense, it could continue the psychological oppression that his win streak had established. On the other hand, Samsara was definitely aware of Happy's best choice, so their choice of player would, to a certain extent, have to counter it. Who was most appropriate on Samsara's side? While everyone was discussing, Samsara's Jiang Botao reported their first player to the judge. And at the same time, from their roster, Sun Xiang was already walking toward the competitor booth. End chapter.